I'm Lisa Mickelson, head of global human capital at Flourish Ventures. We back entrepreneurs whose innovations help people achieve financial health and prosperity. Today, we're talking about the importance and effect of mental health on founders and entrepreneurship. The fact of the matter is that challenging mental health issues actually go hand in hand with creativity and success of a startup company. Today, I'm thrilled to talk with Dr. Michael Freeman, who will tell us that the mental health issues are essential to that success, and that it's essential for investors to realize that and help guide founders and CEOs with that in mind. Dr. Michael Freeman is a psychiatrist, a serial entrepreneur, and an executive coach. With support from the Kauffman Foundation, Dr. Freeman studies issues related to entrepreneur mental health in collaboration with colleagues from UC Berkeley, the Gallup organization, as well as other universities. I'd also like to point out that he has done over 6,000 hours of direct psychiatric work with entrepreneurs. Dr. Freeman, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Lisa. I really want to thank you personally for caring about this issue, and to thank Flourish for elevating the issue and the Flourish community for considering it and participating in being part of the solution.
Dr. Freeman, your work can be considered groundbreaking. To my knowledge, very little research has been done between or on the link between entrepreneurship and mental health. How did you come to a realization that this is something worth doing?
That's a great question, because I kind of wandered into it 20 years ago, Lisa. When I started looking into this, I didn't know that 80% of net new jobs are created by companies that are less than 5 years old. And I didn't know that fully 30% of people who are employed, people who are working, either are entrepreneurs themselves or are directly employed by them. And so our economy literally cannot function without entrepreneurs. What I did know, because I'm a psychiatrist and an entrepreneur, and at that time I had about 100 entrepreneur clients, was that there were some kind of mental health differences going on. And I was very lucky to be able to collaborate with Dr. Sherry Johnson, who is she's a professor of psychology at UC Berkeley. And my other co-investigator, Dr. Sangeeta Badal, was the head of the entrepreneurship practice at the Gallup organization at that time. And so with a grant from the Kauffman Foundation, we were able to study 1,000 entrepreneurs, really carefully selected, to find out what is that relationship between entrepreneurship and mental health. And you used the word groundbreaking. There were some kind of breakthrough realizations that came out of it. One of them is, what is the magnitude of this situation? What is the magnitude of that relationship between mental health and entrepreneurship? The next one is, what is the root cause of this mental health and entrepreneurship going hand in hand? And the third one is that when we talk about entrepreneur mental health, we really need to be talking about neurodiversity rather than mental health conditions. In other words, entrepreneurs have different kinds of minds. Steve Jobs was right. Entrepreneurs do think different. And just to put it in perspective about the magnitude, we found that almost 40% of founders reported having one or another kind of mental health condition, be it depression or ADHD or anxiety or bipolar spectrum, something or other, or addiction. It's a big number. And if you think about it, we have 15 million entrepreneurs in the United States alone. And what that means is that there are literally 6 million entrepreneurs just in this country with mental health conditions. And for many of them, they can be pretty significant mental health conditions, even though the ones with some really significant mental health conditions also get the great business results. So we found out about the magnitude and what the root causes are, and also more about neurodiversity, which I can tell you a little bit more about as well.
These are incredible findings, and it is truly overwhelming to hear just the sheer numbers. And also thinking about it from the way you framed it as integral parts in our society and how responsible they are for job creation and, frankly, change on a massive scale. Um, you've talked about creative capital in the past as a term. Help us understand a little bit more about what is creative capital and how is it beneficial to all of us?
Well, that's a very important issue because creative capital, simply stated, is the ability to make lemonade when life sends you lemons. It's the ability to think out of the box. It's the ability to innovate. It's the ability to improvise. And when economists, I didn't make that word up, creative capital, economists famously at the University of Toronto in Canada have studied creative capital. And what they find, they study it at the level of the nations. And what they find is that creative capital is the most valuable input into economic production. Your capital includes land and raw materials and resources and money and human capital, and creative capital adds more value than any of the rest of them. And the thing that we have to understand about creative capital is that it is intimately associated with and inseparable from mental health differences. And so if we're an economy that is going to depend on entrepreneurs to create growth and to create jobs and to create innovation, then this cannot be done without leaning pretty heavily on people who have mental health conditions. It's two sides of the same coin. It's inseparable. And we have to just accept the fact that the people who bring us these breakthroughs and create the jobs and drive the growth have proclivities to make lemonade out of lemons, and they have proclivities to think differently, and they have proclivities to have emotional issues as well.
It sounds like it is truly the secret sauce that
It's the
I've heard
secret sauce, yeah.
talked about, the secret sauce of what makes things change. And thank you so much for that definition. And also um, sounds like it's something that is important for all of us to nurture.
We should all nurture our own creativity, and there are a lot of things you can do to become even more creative than you already are. And one thing I'll put on everybody's list is go out and take a walk in nature. It opens up your creative imagination. But if you really zoom out and take a look at it, what you see is that almost anybody can hold a job. And there are a lot of people who can lead a team or a club or an organization, but very, very few people can start and grow a business. And that's the different kind of creative capital that is so special about entrepreneurs, and is also a superpower linked up with these risks and vulnerabilities.
As you think about many of the entrepreneurs that you work with and at large, what are some of the most pressing issues that entrepreneurs are struggling with today that you see in this very dynamic, changing world that we're all trying to function in?
There are pressing issues that entrepreneurs are dealing with today, and then there's pressing issues that entrepreneurs always deal with. And the pressing issues that entrepreneurs are dealing with today, a lot of it has to do with the capital markets are pulling back because the interest rates have gone up, and so a lot of companies are under pressure from that. But on average, hands down, Lisa, the stress and burnout are the biggest factors that entrepreneurs deal with. And they often lack the emotional support and the resources that they need to deal with it, including time and including skills and including the self-care knowledge that's necessary to stay well. So high level, that's the big thing. But it's way more nuanced and complex than that.
Right, absolutely. And so you're mentioning kind of at the macro level some of the economic conditions and that are, creating additional stressors, but also down to the personal level, just how to get along in relationships and how to, kind of reconcile some personal differences. I'm very curious to hear, as investors, we may not be healthcare professionals, but we often have very frequent conversations with our founders. And I'm wondering, what you might suggest to the venture community. What are ways that we can be supportive of the individuals that we serve? Again, not as being psychiatrists, we won't necessarily know all the ins and outs of someone's very personal situations. But what are ways that we can build a great relationship and be supportive?
Well, I told you we kind of got to the root cause of the situation in our research, and it boils down to two things. There's what do the entrepreneurs bring to the party, and what does the party bring to the entrepreneurs? The entrepreneurship kind of attracts people who think different and have more likelihood of bringing this different neurodiversity and this vulnerability to mental health conditions with them. On the investor side, you give them the resources that they need to bring their vision to life. And what often happens, if you just think about it like this, once they meet you guys, then they have this very exciting opportunity to be flying a really cool supersonic jet that goes at twice the speed of sound. And they get into it and they realize that they only have half as much fuel in the tank as they need to get to the airport.
Mm-hmm.
And then they realize that they don't have a parachute. And as an investor, that 50% of the companies you invest in are going to fail. And so you're kind of sending them off into the blue horizon under these circumstances. So I would say, to answer your question, keep that in mind, that there's a very different risk exposure between the investors and the founders. You as an investor, you guys have a portfolio. And if half of your companies fail, and then another 30% neither fail nor succeed, and then you've got 15% that succeed and 5% really knock it out of the park, great. Your fund is going to do fine. But for the entrepreneurs, the investors want to make money, the founders want to make an impact. And so for them, they've concentrated all their risk in this one.
Right. It's everything.
It's everything.
I love what you're saying. I think that, you mentioned the financial capital, of course, as being very catalytic, but also what I'm hearing from you is this sort of need to also be empathetic. And historically, as I think about venture and commercial businesses, there's a bit of a tension between driving profits and being empathetic. Is that possible? Can we play that role? And are you maybe even starting to see that change in your work with entrepreneurs? Are you hearing that there is more empathy coming out of the venture capital world? Would just love to hear if in light of recent events in the last couple of years, if you're noticing that there's any catalyst for change there.
I do think empathy is important, because a lot of investors that I talk with, and keep in mind, I'm a psychiatrist for the Silicon Valley ecosystem. And you didn't mention it. I don't think I even told you, but most of the people I work with are entrepreneurs. But I also work with a bunch of investors who fortunately have the wisdom to get their own kind of mental health support. So from that vantage point, empathy is really important because you're not investing in racehorses, you're investing in people. And you got to care about entrepreneurs as people, not just as bets you're putting on the table. And as people, empathy is a good place to start, but it's a little bit more than that. And yes, it is beginning to change. There is beginning to be more awareness of this issue. So a little bit more than that, what do I mean? Well, when you send these guys out in their jets, and women, by the way, you can pack some parachutes for them as well. And then underneath, you can create some safety nets. What is a parachute and what is a safety net? Well, one parachute is, well, one thing you can do is normalize mental health differences. I mean, keep in mind, a lot of investors used to be entrepreneurs, and your DNA didn't change just because you went from one side of the table to the other side of the table. The entrepreneurs are not going to tell you about their mental health problems because they want to make a good impression and they want you to come back on the next funding round, and they are afraid of the stigma. And then but there's no law that says you can't tell them about your mental health issues. And I think if you talk to entrepreneurs about your mental health issues without expecting them to do the same thing, what you do is you give them permission to have mental health issues, and you kind of normalize it. And if you investors are doing something for yourselves, and I'm just thinking, I got an email this morning from a, a VC woman who I've worked with down in the Valley, and her firm has like their own mental health team inside to keep all the investors
Wow.
doing well.
Fantastic.
Yesterday I met with a venture partner at a different VC firm, and his firm has what they call the founder pledge. And what that means is that they tell the founder, we're going to always vote with the founder on when board issues come up, which is very reassuring because a lot of founders think that the investors are what they call friendly snakes. And so if you know that your investors are friendly and they're not snakes, that makes a huge difference. And then there's like another VC firm I know about where whatever funds are invested, they take 1% for the founder to spend on their own professional development or mental health or personal growth. And, it's kind of a use it or lose it type of thing.
Right.
But so those are all.
These are great examples. Yes, Dr. Freeman. I mean, I'm hearing from you leading by example, showing your own vulnerability as an investor, providing resources, both internally to your own teams as well as to your CEOs or your founders. Really tangible ideas. I love those. I know from your research that some of the highest potential individuals also may be at highest risk based on the research. And knowing that, do you think that would be a reason to double down on some of these efforts, or could it be sort of a segue to help eliminate some of that stigma and create a different sort of thinking and perception within the industry?
all of the above. That's a really good question. I appreciate you asking it because, like I said, we found that there's this very high rate of people, 3% who make suicide attempts, 1.7% who have a history of psychiatric hospitalization. What I didn't tell you is that many of those very same people are the ones who get the best business results. And so this idea of looking at mental health differences as a disability doesn't really hold up. It's an ability, and it is also a challenge. So kind of where your question leads is how do you empower the entrepreneurs to deploy their superpowers while creating some risk management strategies so that they don't unravel along the way? I mean,
Exactly.
yeah. And I, from my background, you mentioned, my background in healthcare, it can be done. It's been done already with different populations. It's been done for maternal and child health. It's been done for adolescents. It's been done for the elderly. It just hasn't been done for entrepreneurs. But if you think about neurodiversity, different kinds of minds, it's a different population. You think about it that way, then the same strategies that you use for population mental health in other populations apply. The reason people don't think about it that way is because everybody's focused on other kinds of diversity. But what we found is that Asian or South Asian or Hispanic or Black or white or older or younger or whatever kind of gender or immigrant or refugee or homegrown, that these entrepreneurs really have more in common with each other than they do with whoever they live next door to. So that's why I think about entrepreneurs as a neurotribe. And if you're going to intervene, you intervene at the level of the neurotribe, not the level, as well as the level of the individual. But if you're going to solve it at a systemic level, you got to think about it that way.
I love that Neurotribe. That's a great phrase. And I do find that they like to connect with each other, and there's a lot of opportunities to see eye to eye on different experiences.
Entrepreneurs very much connect with each other because they're part of the same neurotribe. And even if they're like entirely different, look inside your own company. You got a bunch of entrepreneurs inside your firm who became investors, and they're all really different from each other, but they all really connect.
Right.
Not only do they connect with each other, yeah. But this has been shown in the research. To me, it's just fascinating. They leave home and they go somewhere else, and where they go are these ecosystems. And ecosystems are part of a global village of regional enclaves where entrepreneurs like to live. And these regional enclaves have like this macro psychology that reflects the psychology of the entrepreneurs themselves. And basically entrepreneurs are like free, and they're open-minded, and they tend to be extroverted, and they live in places where it's okay to be free and open-minded and extroverted and different.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that neurotribe and where it goes and how it behaves at a sort of larger macro level. And my hope is also that they're sharing with each other experiences around working with investors. And I'd like them to feel empowered to be choosier about the investors they decide to form partnerships with. And this, it can oftentimes be a decades-long relationship that, as you mentioned, and we all know is way beyond the financial capital. How do you think entrepreneurs can be more discerning when it comes to their choice around investor? What kind of flags should they be looking for? What should they proactively be looking for in an investor who would be a great partner for them in the future?
That's a really good question. And you're right. The entrepreneurs have to think of it kind of the same way that you would think about a marriage. Is this person going to be with you, for better and for worse, and in good times and in bad times? And it's not just, who's going to give you the best valuation today. So I would go back to what I said. Is this investor someone who is interested in having a real relationship with you as a real person? Or are they like people who are betting on horses at the horse race? You can, as a founder, you can just find out if the VC firm that you're going to be in a relationship with is doing anything at all about support for founders, founder support, founder mental health. Some VC firms are beginning to try experiments and do different things around that. To me, that would be a very good sign that, and I gave you a couple examples of that just a minute ago. You asked about red flags. To me, one red flag is, to what extent does this firm have a history of replacing founders? Replacing founders, you do not want to do that unless you absolutely have to. Why is that? Because the companies that are led by the founders, on average, have massively better business results, 10x, 20x higher valuations, and they put more money in R&D, and they have faster sales growth, and they do spend more on mergers and acquisitions. So, take a look. To what extent have these investors replaced founders in the past and pushed them out versus worked with them and try to empower them to continue to lead their companies?
So what I'm hearing is this sort of, how actively involved are they in supporting their founders? What's their history of that? And also, how they're thinking about a long-term relationship. How do they talk about it? How do they show up? How well are they getting to know you? And vice versa. Like you
and
said,
what's the
it's
culture
like a
of their
marriage.
own organization?
Right.
Do they talk the talk or do they walk the walk?
I guess my question to you would be, if those are the traits that we're looking for as investors, as disruptors, as those who are trying to create change on a massive scale, why wouldn't we be more supportive of mental health differences or brain differences?
I think it's largely cultural attitudes. We, for hundreds of years, have not properly understood the concept of neurodiversity, and our culture's made up all kinds of narratives about mental health differences, which are just not true, and people have bought into that. So there's shame and stigma. So it's a learning curve, I think, for everybody to begin to view it from a different perspective. And you're right in that their errors of judgment are made as a result of not having the right filter to look through when you're evaluating what kind of people you want to engage with. You got to just open your mind to looking at people differently and thinking about people differently.
I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation, Dr. Freeman. Open your mind and be willing to look at people differently and think about
I would even go farther than that. I would say open your mind to the idea that this whole situation can be improved. but we all have to work together to improve it. I was just thinking about this earlier today because there are a lot of refugee entrepreneurs in the United States right now because of wars. And we need to, in my opinion, we need to create a mental health trauma center for entrepreneurs who have been traumatized in one way or another. But no individual stakeholder in the ecosystem is able to do that. But if a lot of stakeholders come together, we can begin to solve at scale for problems like that. So yeah, open your mind to looking at people differently, but think about the idea that we all benefit from this innovation ecosystem, and we can all give back to the ecosystem and create some of the parachutes and create some of the safety nets that are going to, in the long run, benefit all of us. And I'll just wrap up by saying one thing, which is that whenever anybody invests in mental health, the cost ends up to be zero. There's really no cost to investing in mental health because the cost offsets are so great that it's actually a positive return on investment. So if you look at people in a different way, if you think about investing in mental health in a different way, I think that's going to take us in the right direction.
These are very powerful words, Dr. Freeman. I'm so grateful for you sharing your time and insights with us here at Flourish and the broader community. Thank you again so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. And really, thank you for elevating this issue and creating a forum where people can begin to talk about it.
Well, we hope this is just the start, so more to come. And for those of you watching who have any questions regarding our discussion today, please feel free to email us at events@flourishventures.com. If you're interested in more kinds of programming like this, stand by. And thank you again for watching.